Well, howdy doody everybody. We should have everything here to build the gravel bike. We've got the iCan full carbon fibre Graro frame set, including the integrated headset, integrated handlebar head stem, seat post. Then we've got Elite drive wheels. They're full carbon fibre with carbon fibre spokes, tyres and tubes, cassette's already on. We've got the EDS Wheeltop GEX gravel group set, including the brake set. We've got GRX cranks, we've got Praxis bottom bracket, Shimano pedals, what have we got? And some bits and pieces, seat, handlebar tape, bottle cages. Hopefully everything's here, let's get on with it. If your brake hoses are going to be external to your handlebars, you can leave the hoses connected to the calipers out of the box. You should only need to thread the rear hose through your frame, pop on the compression nut, olive and barb, then screw that into the hydro receptor on the shifter, and you're done. If you're doing integrated hoses, you may find it easier to disconnect the hoses from the calipers, drain the mineral oil, and maybe even cut one or both ends of the hoses to get the hoses through your integrated bars. Remember, both the caliper and shifter ends use Shimano compatible barbs and olives. A big plus for having wireless gear system, you don't need any of the gear cables going through your frame. All you need is the rear brake hose and the front brake hose going down your fork, so we can take out the front and rear gear guides. Next is to put some foam in a down tube here, so we'll put the brake hose through so it doesn't rattle on your carbon frame. Now you can either use this thick stuff here, or what I use is just ordinary door steel. Go to your hardware store, door seal, and you can cut it. It comes in a huge length, like 6 meters or something, for $3. It's so cheap. So we'll just measure and cut. For integrated bar hoses, make sure you get the hoses through the bearings and fittings. Don't forget any pieces or get any the wrong way around. Okay, we've gotten this far. Now it's time to put our nifty shifties on, the GEX shifters. So you peel back the lever hood at the front, throw your 5mm Allen key in, undo the clamp a little bit, and then this rubber gets in the way, sometimes on the inside bit. Just start it off, you'll be right. There we go. Don't have your clamp too tight, otherwise you'll scratch your handlebar. Not that it matters, because you're going to put handlebar tape on anyway. And if you have it too loose, you'll lose the clamp. The lever will come off, or the clamp will come off the lever. Now just put them in approximately where you want them. Approximately, doesn't have to be exact yet. Putting the wheels on the bike to get the shifters in approximately the right position. This one's too high, I can see that. So again, the 5mm Allen key again, down a little bit. Because your integrated bars are fixed, they're not going to tilt. Where you put your levers are where they're going to stay. So get your tilt right. With the brake calipers, you've got little adapters, and they've got numbers written on them. 160F up, pointing upwards. If you're going to use 160 rotors like me, the larger ones, then you point that upwards, and then your caliper goes onto there, and then that goes onto there. Like that. But first you've got to put the caliper onto here. So just make sure your arrow's up. That's the way your caliper goes. The brake fins, the brake pads always point that way, don't they? So put these screws here, put them in first before you put the whole lot on your forks. Otherwise you won't be able to get it together. Use these short tapered head bolts, not these longer bolts. Screw them through the adapter and into the caliper, and make sure that they're fairly tight, about 10 Newton meters. So the bolt heads should be recessed into the adapter so that they don't interfere with the frame fitting. Before mounting your calipers to the frame, make sure the frame mounts are flat. It's common to have some paint overspray, like on this frame. To remove any paint spray, simply use a medium grade sandpaper on a block. Much better. Now blow into each hole to get rid of any sanding grit. For the rear, the seat stay can get in the way, so just be careful not to go sanding any other surfaces, only the caliper mounts. All nice, ready to mount the calipers now. From the brake parts, choose the appropriate bolts for each caliper and mount your calipers. For the rear caliper, you need this piece. It's a bit chunky and shorter, so that goes there, and then your caliper goes on top like that. So bolt the adapter onto the caliper first, and make sure the bolts are quite tight, about 10 Newton meters. Then using the longer bolts, attach the caliper and adapter to the frame. Over to the shifters, and if you need your hydraulic hose to be an exact length, be aware that the hose needs to go into the receptor by 15 millimeters. So measure and cut the hose to the length needed. This means you'll lose the end that Wheeltop provided and you'll have to put on your own olive and barb. Then put on the compression plug, olive and barb, and finally push in the barb. A little bit of grease on the outside of the olive and on the thread of the compression nut ensures a good seal. Remove the plastic plug in the hydraulic receptor and secure the hydraulic hose to the shifter. Once you've connected a hose to the shifter, in this case it's the front one, just make sure that your handlebars can go all the way around both sides freely, and then you can measure down at your caliper. Do the same for the rear. If you've got excess hose at the caliper, make sure you measure so that you've got 15 millimeters to go into the hydraulic hose receptor, and then you can cut the hose. Then put on the compression nut, the olive, and push in the barb. For the bleeding process for your shifter, you use this little brass bit that screws into the shifter hood and the bleed port, and then inside the little brass bit goes a small plastic pillar hose like that, and then the funnel inside that. That's all I used on the shifter. And then for the caliper, I use this. This actually come from a SRAM kit. It's a fairly large and coarse thread. Bit of the hose on there, and then just one of these cheap syringes. Just plugs in there, doesn't have to screw in, just fits in there, and that does your calipers front and rear. Pull back the lever hood from the handlebars and undo the bleed port screw. Handy hint, attach a magnet to the Allen key so that holds the bleed port screw when you lift it off. Insert the brass adapter into the port. Another handy hint is hold the lever hood back with a 4mm Allen key. Make sure the brass adapter is snug up into the port, otherwise you'll have mineral oil leaking down on the body of the lever and under the lever hood. Now I do have one problem, and that's with the brake pad holding pin E-clip at the back. It's very small and very fragile, and you pry it off with a small flathead screwdriver and it just goes ping, and you won't see it again probably. It'll go behind the bench, on the corner, under the bench, on your carpet, wherever it goes, and you probably won't find it. I lost both E-clips on these calipers. I found one down in the corner, and then later on during the day, about 5 hours later, I was sweeping with a magnet to find it, and I did find it. So they're a problem, and I'm sure that everybody doing their calipers is going to lose those E-clips unless you've got some secret to getting them off and holding them. And the Shimano clips, which are a good idea, you can pull them off on and off with your fingers. They do not fit on these Wheeltop calipers. So my suggestion is, once you lose the E-clip, and I'm sure you will, use a bit of Loctite on the thread, clean the thread with some isopropyl alcohol and put a blob of Loctite on there, and then you'll be right. So you can at least the pin's not going to come undone, and you can take it in and out still. Now to do the brake bleeding, you can use the kit that Wheeltop supply, or you can use your own bleed kit if you've already got one. Oh, it's pretty good. Yep. Honestly, this Wheeltop brake system, and I found it on the Road TX version as well, much easier and quicker to set up and better results as well. SRAM would be next, and then Shimano's the worst one. With Shimano, you're always going, oh, the brakes still feel a bit squishy. I think there's still some air in the line. Better bleed it again. Look at that. First shot, bang, straight away. So just push the brake fluid up from the caliper to the brake lever. When there's bubbles to stop, seal it off down the bottom, and you're done. Works perfect first time. So whatever you're doing with your brake bleed system Wheeltop, you've done a really good job. Just a word of warning, if you ever need to take this hose out, there's a little O-ring just in front of the barb and the caliper body, right down the bottom there. And it seals the barb and the caliper up so that you don't leak any fluid. And it's this tiny, so be prepared to look for it if you take the hose out. If it goes missing, you'll need to go and buy yourself a teeny weeny little O-ring. I think it's about 4mm in width, 3.5, 4mm. Very small. So the brakes are working fine now, and it'll probably take you about 2.5 hours to get your hoses through and integrate through your frame and to bleed them and all that sort of stuff. And yet here's your gear, up to the gears now. It's so simple being wireless, because this is literally going to take 1 minute to put on. A little bit of grease on the hanger bolt thread, 5mm Allen key, and screw it straight onto the hanger. I think that took about 30 seconds to put on. And just works. Just put the pedals on and the seat. Next, before I put the chain on, is the front derailleur hanger. We won't be needing that because this is a 1x system. So I could leave it on, but it looks ugly and it sticks out a bit, and don't like sticky outy bits to do nothing on the bike. So I'm going to take that off, and then I'm going to put something over the holes so that water doesn't get into the frame. So it leaves 2 holes with threads in a recessed square. We could put the original bolts back in, or could put some plastic plugs in there. That looks a bit better. I used a cut-off piece of soft rubbery flat strapping, the sort of thing that goes under a head unit or a light bracket. Bit of super glue on the back of it, slap it on, hold it for a while, and voila. That does a pretty good job. So for your rear derailleur cable, which you don't need anymore, it's just a hole, so you just need to fill it with a blind grommet. Usually a hardware store or even an automotive store will sell them. But the front one, if it's shaped like this, now some of them have got a little clip where you can use your fingernail and just pick it out, push it down, pick it out, and it comes out. Well, this one hasn't got it. So it's sort of, how do you get that one out? If you use a flathead screwdriver to try and force it out, you might end up scratching your paintwork. So what I suggest, because the hole is meant for your 5mm cable, use a 5mm Allen key, put it 20mm into the hole, and then push it inwards, and it will just pull the plug out like that. And you can get these oblong shaped soft rubbery grommets, and they fit perfectly in. You might need to poke the last little bit with a flathead screwdriver in order to get it to fit perfectly into the hole, but no need to glue it into place. Measuring and cutting the chain now. I'm using a Connex SX chain, and they come in 118 links. The largest sprocket at the back is 42 tooth, and the chain ring is 40 tooth. Cutting off 4 links and the chain fits perfectly. One handy hint I found beneficial is when you're tuning your gears, if you're going to do the sprockets individually, if you have to, then take the tension off the dampener, take the fairing off, undo the tension a bit so it's like a normal derailleur. There you go, on the slack. And that way you can hear the sprockets individually. If you have the tension too tight, it's like, is that right? It sounds like it's out of gear all the time. So just take the tension off, tune your gears, and then put your dampener, tighten it up to however you want, and then you can put your fairing back on and you're done. When fitting the chain, remember that the 1x system should be using a narrow wide tooth profile on the chainring. This helps prevent the chain from falling off the chainring when you're riding on rough terrain. Wheeltop uses this narrow wide tooth profile on the lower jockey wheel on the rear derailleur. So when threading your chain through the rear derailleur, make sure the chain sits down onto the lower jockey wheel teeth and not riding on top of the teeth. This is not the case with the upper jockey wheel. The chain will go on anyhow. And because your levers stick out just a little bit on all gravel bikes, even road bikes I've seen them, they stick out a bit. And even if they don't stick out, these little things, I've got them on AliExpress, really cheap, they're little rubber ends. Put them on the end of your lever and it just protects the end. Just sort of a cosmetic thing. So you can get these AliExpress really cheap, about $5 for a pair. So all set up, and you've got up and down buttons, and of course you can swap the buttons around whichever way you want. The big one for up change and the one in the front for say going down, or vice versa. You can program in the app. And you've got this left one which does nothing. Well, it actually can do something. If you match it up in the app, what you can do is use a paddle to go up or down on your cassette. For instance, I'll just, the big paddle, I've got it going up, and the small paddle at the front going down. But I've also got this paddle on the left one going down as well. There you go. So if you want, So just for something different, you can have your right hand shifter for going up your cassette or down, and your left hand shifter for going up or down, whichever one you want. And you can still use both buttons on the front here, so just like I've got here, whichever way you want. For the shifter batteries, you may need to remove and reinsert the battery for pairing the shifter, or if you need to replace the battery when it's out of sufficient charge. It's a bit fiddly to get the cap back on because it needs to be aligned in the right spot before it will drop into place, and you can twist lock the cap. There are 3 ledges under the cap which need to slot into 3 corresponding cavities in the lever body around the battery. Mark the lever at the centre of the frontmost cavity. Then mark the centre of the frontmost ledge on the cap and continue that mark straight up to the top of the cap. Now when you insert the cap, simply line up the marks and press down on the cap and it should fall into place. Then twist the cap clockwise and it locks in place. The 2 limit screws, the first one is at the back near the battery of the derailleur. That stops how far the derailleur goes inwards. So once the chain is on your largest sprocket, you don't want it to go any further in. So that's at the back. And the second one is under the shroud here. That stops how far out your derailleur comes. So you don't want your chain to go in between the smaller sprocket and your frame, start grinding away at your frame. You don't want that. So the limit screw stops that, so that just stays onto the small sprocket, and that's it. The other adjustment you may need to do is the B screw here, just to make sure everything's just perfect for the sprocket set that you're using. That B screw adjusts the distance between your jockey wheel and the top of the teeth of the sprocket that you're in. If the jockey wheel's too close to the sprocket, the chain makes a clickety 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 sound like it wants to change gear, and yet it's in gear perfectly. If the jockey wheel's too far away, then when you go to change gear, it'll be slow and sloppy, and you also get that clickety clickety like it wants to change gear but not quite there. So you need to get the happy medium just right for each sprocket. It's not rocket science, just have a fiddle around with the B screw till you get it right and you'll be okay. If this is your first time using the Wheeltop app, have a fiddle around, get to know the pages, get familiar with it all before you start adjusting your gears. So open the Wheeltop app. It will ask to access Bluetooth, allow. If there's any updates available, do them. Now it's searching for your device. Now it's found it and communicating that's a good sign. Getting an information, in other words, how much charge on your battery, etc. Tap on the settings symbol. Then at the top of the list, equipment debugging. Then at the bottom of the list, fine tuning. And there's all your sprocket positions by number. The smallest sprocket on your cassette will be the smallest number, and the largest sprocket will be the largest number. Start at the smallest sprocket, that's gear number 1, and tap on that. So gear number 1, and just below that is a small number, 220. You can erase that and type in a new number, say 200, which is a smaller number, which means that'll bring the derailleur out toward the frame a bit more. And there it is on the list, 200. So you set the new number, 200, in the app, but the rear derailleur hasn't recognised it yet. In order for it to recognise that new number, you need to shift off of that sprocket onto another one and then come back to that original sprocket. So we'll shift off the smallest cog to the next one up and come back to it. And now the rear derailleur knows the new number, 200. So every time you want to change a number of a sprocket, you need to shift off of that sprocket and then back to it in order for the rear derailleur to remember the new number. So do this for each individual sprocket, working your way up to the largest, and then you're done. Now you may not even have to worry about all the setting individual sprockets because Wheeltop have put presets in there already suitable for the right spacing on a Shimano cassette. So it should be okay. If it's not, then you'll need to do each individual sprocket. Well, I did 6 rides at the moment. That's 2 on the road and 4 off-road. and haven't had any issues whatsoever. Now, when I first got it out of the box, some YouTubers said, oh, it works straight out of the box, this kit, but I found mine didn't. So what I did, and if yours doesn't, do the same, just take the battery out the right-hand shifter and get your rear derailleur, give it a shake to wake it up, put the battery back in and then paddle the gear, and a couple of seconds later it started working, so that was no problem. And then when I did connect it to the phone, it said only had 48% battery life in the rear derailleur, no big deal. And then I ran it for another 3 rides, and then it got down to about 17%, I think it was. And then I thought I better charge it up. Don't want to get stuck out in the middle of a ride and the battery goes out. So no problems whatsoever so far. The other thing is, with no front derailleur, because there's no front derailleur, it's really easy to set up. Just bang on the rear one, get this thing connected, paired her up, and it's fine. So no issues. They're pretty boring really, but it does what it's supposed to do. That's the main thing. One thing I had, and it was just a learning curve really, is when I come up and all of a sudden there was a steep hill and you had to quickly change up to your largest sprocket on the back or thereabouts, is instead of going click, click, click one at a time, trying to get it up, which was a little bit too slow, because when all of a sudden you have to go up, you got to go up, otherwise you stop pedaling and you go off your bike. So I found I held the paddle, I held the shifter to go up, and went went up, that's fine. But I went too far and I ended up spinning like this. And so the bike slows down until your RPM, you catch up and you're comfortable with that. And still made up the hill, that was fine. Just that sometimes you've got to get used to how fast it shifts or how slow it shifts. Just get the feel for it and you'll be right. So in that instance, I just held the paddle and went too far. As far as the brakes are concerned, I found for the first 2 rides, they felt like rim brakes. They weren't all that grippy. You know, like, I've got hydraulic brakes here. Why aren't they gripping really, really well? Why aren't they finger touch, one finger? Well, I found that after about the 4th ride, 5th ride, they started gripping better. So I think maybe what that is the ceramic carbon pads need longer to wear in. I did a bit of research and found out BMW, or someone who's come up with the idea of ceramic carbon pads, said the same thing. They do take a bit of wearing in. So maybe keep that in mind if you're using the original ones, not Shimano. If you're using the pads that come with these rotors, give them time to bed in, give them time for some of that carbon, ceramic, whatever is in there, to embed itself on the braking surface on the rotor before it starts gripping properly. So at least a couple of rides before you start getting really nice, strong hydraulic braking power there. For the gear shifting paddles, they're exactly the same as the TX version. So they're not just a light touch and it changes gear. You actually have to push it in a little bit more and then it clicks and sends a signal to the derailleur. So it stops accidental shifting. And I found that really handy, not so much for on-road, but for off-road, when you're concentrating on where you're going and that, and if you've got your fingers dangling or something happening, you don't want to make accidental shifts, because if you're going on up an incline and it shifts down, then you're going to come off your bike because it shifts down the small gear and, oh, and you come off. Anyway, so no accidental shifting. You have to actually meaningfully push the button before it changes the derailleur, which is really good, I found anyway. One funny thing that happened, that was on the very first ride, and it was the shift of the right hand hood, and I found I just felt like something's lumpy in my hand, and I just did the whole ride not worried about it. And I got home, put the bike away, and I noticed, oh, there's a little lump sticking out sort of on the side of the lever. And all it was, I pulled the lever hood back, and the little insert which goes into the body, a little square thing that holds the hood onto the body, wasn't pushed into the hole properly, and it was sticking out. The left one was fine, but the right one was sticking out a bit. So I just pushed it in the hole, put the lever hood back on, and it was smooth, just the same as the other side. All that whole ride with a little lump sticking in my hand. So just make sure those little lump bits on the lever hood, when you pull your hood back and all that, if you do bleeding or you do the battery or whatever you do, or you adjust the brake clamp on your handlebars, just make sure that your hood goes back and the little lumpy bit on the inside of the hood goes into the hole properly in the shifter body. Otherwise you'll have a lump sticking in your hand. Just a few things about setting up. The brake bleeding is really, really easy. You just push your fluid up to the top here, bubbles come out. When you shut it off, bingo, it works straight away. It's almost like there's no air in the line. So whatever Wheeltop have done with their brake setup, however they do it, it works really well. Very easy for a beginner. So if you've never bled brakes before, then this would be a great set to start off on. Very, very easy to do. And they work fine straight away. And talking about brakes, another thing I found that was good with the Wheeltop shifters is the receptor in the shifter body where you screw in your compression plug. Instead of being plastic like the Shimano one, and it's easy to crack if you go too far over the torque, and then it's very costly. You've got to either buy a new lever or try and fix it up somehow with a carbon repairer. It's metal in the Wheeltop one. So if you accidentally tighten it too much, it'll be very forgiving, it'll be fine. So that's a big plus, good on your Wheeltop for making that metal. One thing I found, and I live in Australia, it's fairly dry here, is when you get wet and if you let your bike dry, it's very easy for the bolts to start rusting. It's a very thin coating of chrome or whatever it is on there, and it's a steel bolt and they'll readily rust. So if you do live in a wet climate, then expect rust on the bolts, maybe spraying with something regularly to keep the rust away. So Wheeltop, if you can replace them with titanium would be nice. If not, at least stainless steel bolts, that would be good. And one suggestion, if you're listening Wheeltop, please get rid of the E-clips. Put some sort of fingered clip on there so you can take it on and off. If you go and undo the E-clips, they just fly away and they're so small you can't find them, those little E-clips at the back. Or find some other way of doing it. Just don't use these little teeny weeny E-clips. They're a terrible idea. Aesthetically, I think the GEX kit looks really good. Chunky, rugged looking rear derailleur in a dark grey colour. The levers are really nice, shape to the hand, and they're all black. So pretty much suit any bike you're going to put this kit on. The rear derailleur seems to handle all the bumps and vibrations that come with off-road riding. No problem at all, not one missed gear all those rides. And the dampening system seemed to work really well. No chain slap. In fact, I haven't even got a mark on the chainstay here. There's no protector, it's just the paint, and there's no slop. You can see it like... The gauge is just there, so it stops it there from going anymore. It'll flap to here, and then it'll stop about here and it won't flap at all. So that dampening system definitely works. Something's just happened and it's come up on their website is the GEX component system is now compatible with all the rest of their Wheeltop components. So that means if you want to run a flat bar, you can get their OX shifters, the thumb shifters, and run it with the GEX system. Or if you want a 2-by, yep, if you want a 2-by system at the front derailleur, it's compatible with the TX front derailleur. So you can get that paddle on the other side, you know how there's a single paddle on the left side, you can get that now to change with the TX front derailleur. So that's new and that's great, gives us a lot more options there. Well, that's about all I've got to say. One more word is, it just works, and it works really well. Bikes at the cafe, one of the riders says, they won't pinch your old bomb.